Okay, I think we'll get started here. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Desmond. I'm curator at the Monhegan Museum of Art and History and a member of the Monhegan Associates Ecology Committee. And I'd like to welcome you to this first event in our 2026 program series, a collaboration between the Monhegan Museum of Art and History and the Monhegan Associates. I'd like to begin by welcoming all of the Monhegan Museum and Monhegan Associates members who are joining us tonight. Your support really does make events like this possible, so thank you. If you're not already a member, it's quick and easy to join by going to our respective websites, Monhegan Museum or Monhegan Associates, and clicking on the donate buttons. We would love to welcome you to our community of support for preservation of Monhegan's wildlands and its cultural and artistic heritage. I'd also like to give a warm welcome to our board members who are here, as well as to those of you who are attending one of our programs for the first time. We're glad to have you among us. A big thank you to both the Monhegan Associates and the Monhegan Museum of Art and History for collaborating on this year's series of lectures and programs. Just a few logistical matters. This presentation is in webinar format. And so in this format, you can see and hear the host and speaker, but nobody can see or hear you. So don't worry about background noise or how your hair looks. In this format, you won't be able to ask questions directly, but if you do have a question, you can click on the Q&A button and type in your question or put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to everybody's questions at the end of the presentation. Tonight's lecture will be recorded, and if all goes well, it'll be posted on the Monhegan Associates and the Monhegan Museum websites. And we invite you to join us for upcoming programs in this series. Next month, on Thursday, February 26th at 6 p.m., we've got our very popular virtual trivia night hosted by Billy Boynton and Jackie Bogle. And then on Wednesday, March 25th at 6 p.m., we'll have Swordfish in Wabanaki Homeland by Dr. Bonnie Newsome, Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Maine. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker tonight, wildlife biologist and bat specialist Ethan Gilardi. Ethan is a bat acoustics expert and field lead for the Biodiversity Research Institute's mammal program. He began working with bats over a decade ago with Rutgers University and with New Jersey Department of Fish and Wildlife's Endangered and Non-Game Species program. Since joining the Biodiversity Research Institute in 2022, Ethan has taken part in numerous projects across North and South America, from collecting biological samples in Belize and Colombia as part of BRI's Global Mercury Monitoring Program, to developing offshore bat acoustic recording methods for the Gulf of Maine Bat Research Program. His talk tonight is entitled Flying Offshore, Bats in the Gulf of Maine and Monhegan Island. So please join me in welcoming Ethan Gilardi.
Well, hello, everybody. As our good friend Laura said, my name's Ethan. I work for a group called the Biodiversity Research Institute. We're a nonprofit here in Maine, and we have been doing a lot of work lately looking into how our bats use the offshore environment out in the Gulf of Maine. And this is all going to be leading up to telling y'all all about some results I got from an acoustic monitor that we had out on Monhegan Island last year and in 2024 as well. Um, so to get things started off, I give me such a lovely introduction. I had this slide bragging about all of the work that I've been doing, but you really knocked it out there for me. I've been working with bats for around 11 years. I have found myself becoming a bit of a bat acoustics expert. That is my area of expertise, and I'm going to explain what that is a little later. But the thing that this talk is going to primarily be about, and what we are focusing on, is the Gulf of Maine Bat Research Program. So this is GOMBAT. It's kind of like wombat, but with a G. And this is a program that BRI is leading. looking in partnership with local fishermen, academic institutions, NGOs, state and federal agencies, doing acoustic monitoring out in the Gulf of Maine to get an idea about what bat activity looks like out there, and what bats could be using the offshore environment. So before I get into that, we should probably start with the basics. And probably as basic as we can get is what are bats? This might be this is very open ended. I do have specific things I'm looking for here, and that is bats are mammals. They are warm blooded. They have hair. They give birth to live young. They rear that young with milk they produce in their own bodies. They're mammals. In fact, they are the only true flying mammals that we have here on Earth. I know we have things called flying squirrels. They cannot actually fly. They glide. They're cheating. The only true flyers that we have in the group that we call mammals are the bats. Now, it is important to know what bats aren't, and what bats aren't is rodents. Rodentia is its own group of mammals, and bats are, in fact, a distinct group from them. They are not flying mice. What they are chiropterids. They're of this group in order known as Chiroptera, which is Latin for hand wing. And that's because bat wings are actually modified hands. Over evolutionary time, their fingers became elongated. They're a little more, the bones are more flexible. And they have this membrane of skin that goes between each of their digits. And that is what they use to form their wing to fly. There's only one other group of animals that have ever evolved a method similar to this in terms of flying, and that is actually the pterodons. So pterodactyls are the only other animal in the history of the world that we know of that ever developed a wing method that is skin through bone. So it's just bats and the pterodactyls. I love that fact. It's so fun. And to show you how good of a flyer bats are, this was recorded up in Acadia National Park. This is a slow motion release video of an eastern small-footed bat. Those particles are flowing by as the good old Acadia fog. And you could see this guy take off right from my hand and fly off into the night. They are incredibly agile flyers. They are fantastic at getting around, and they are so well adapted to what it is that they do. And they're actually speaking of rodents from before, so rodents are our most diverse group of mammals, but bats are our second most diverse group of mammals, meaning that they have more species of bats than other types of mammals. There are about 1,500 species that we know of worldwide. Cool fact, end of last year, we officially discovered and recognized the 1,500th bat species, which is super cool. Like we're still finding more of them. When I started working with bats, when I first gave a talk about bats, it was probably around 9 years ago now, which is I'm feeling my age there. There were 1,400 bat species. Like over the last decade, they just keep adding more, and it's an ever growing group. And that graphic I have there is showing all of the species of bats that we know of right now with how they are related to each other. And you can see there is a ton of them. So 1,500 species worldwide. 47 of those you could find here in the United States. And 8 of those species can be found up here in Maine. So let's talk a little bit about the bats that we have here in Maine. Of those 8 species, 3 of them are migratory. They are part-time residents. They do not spend the winters in Maine. They fly south. This would be the hoary bat, the silver-haired bat, and the eastern red bat. These guys they typically roost solitarily. They'll hang from foliage and trees, and they tend to be a little fluffier than the other bats, probably to help them handle the cold a little better as they travel south for the winter. But then we have our full-time residents. These are 5 bats that are cave hibernators. They hibernate, like bears, things like that, through the winter, and they stay up here full time. Those would be the northern long-eared bat, the tricolored bat, the big brown bat, the little brown bat, and the eastern small-footed bat. You're probably noticing all of these colorful squares on the screen right now. This is because around 2007, 2008, a fungal pathogen was introduced into North America called white nose syndrome. This is a pathogen that lives in the soil of caves where these bats hibernate. Um, it gets on their wings, makes a fungal growth on their nose, and it wakes them up repeatedly while they are hibernating, which causes a bat to run out of energy stores. And we have lost 98 to 99% of some of the affected species. It's primarily the Myota species. You can notice with how that has been listed uh, in the graphic on the screen right now. A lot of these bats are now at the state and federal level considered either threatened or endangered. We are probably going to see further listing of these species. Um, and a lot of work is going on to figure out, how exactly this has impacted our bats. Are they going to recover? And I mean, the good news is we are seeing signs of populations recovering, um, but it is been very unfortunate how hard these communities have been affected. But this talk is not about white nose syndrome. This is about bats in general. So we're going to pop over and learn about what it is like to have a year in the life of a bat up here in Maine. Well, fall and winter time, the bats are going to move away from where they're roosting in the summers, and they're going to head towards the areas where they will be hibernating. The bats will form a mating swarm outside of the cave where they will mate with each other. Interesting thing that bats do, they mate before they hibernate, but they are technically not pregnant while they are hibernating. They're actually able to delay either implantation of an embryo or fertilization till the springtime. Um, and then they go out and have their babies in the spring, which is it's a fascinating strategy, especially to see in a mammal. But anyway, after they are done mating, they will head into the cave, cling to a wall, and begin hibernating. Bats actually are incredibly site specific. A bat we have tracked bats in the past into the caves they're hibernating and found that year after year, a bat will choose the exact same spot in a cave to hibernate, as long as it hasn't been disturbed there, like down to like a square foot. That bat will constantly return to that area, which is. I'm going to say a lot during this talk that this is cool and it's fascinating, and I can't apologize for it because it's cool and fascinating. Anyway, while these bats are hibernating, they use a metabolic process that we call torpor. Simply put, they shut down their metabolism to the absolute bare minimum to sustain life. They're very tiny guys. They need to do everything they can to preserve their energy stores through the winter. A bat that's in torpor, its heart will only beat a few times a minute. They'll only breathe once or twice a minute, and their body temperature actually drops to the ambient air temperature. So a bat that is hibernating on the wall of a cave is the temperature of the wall of that cave. And this is why they choose caves to hibernate in, because a cave, should the airflow and other conditions be right, is a very static temperature. So if you go into a cave in the summer, it's 90 degrees out, it'll be 42 degrees in that cave. If you go in the winter and it's -5 out, it's going to be 42 degrees in that cave. They're very stable, which helps the bats while they're using torpor to hibernate. And this is the exact process that white nose syndrome impacts that leads to bat death through the winter. This is a picture of a little brown bat I met in New Jersey in Hibernia mine. He was just getting ready to go into a full torpor before hibernation season hit. And you could see he's got condensation on him because he's just about the same temperature as the wall of that cave. Now, cool thing in Maine is we don't have a lot of caves up here. Um, there's, a few known cave hibernacula in the state that bats hibernate in. And we thought for a very long time that maybe the bats just, fly further south. They go to New Hampshire, other places to hibernate for the winter. But up in Acadia National Park, using acoustic monitors, they documented that bats could be overwintering in talus slopes. So talus slope is a cliffside or a hill that has a bunch of fallen rock in it. And there is just a network of tunnels and burrows and things under that rock. Um, and these areas can act very similar to a cave or a mine. You go 3 feet down into a network of talus, really just arm's length in. And that temperature will have a very similar homeostasis to that of we find in cave hibernacula. So we've recorded bat activity through the winter in these areas, and it seems like at least here in Maine, our bats could be primarily hibernating in this talus. But work's ongoing there. But this is just like a real cool discovery and work that's ongoing here in the state. So spring and summertime, it warms up, the bats wake up, they come out of their hibernation and they head out to the areas they live in the summer. For our resident bat species, this means that the males will kind of go off on their own. They tend to be more solitary than the other than the female bats. Sometimes male bats will group up in groups of two, three, four. We call them a bachelor colony, and they'll just kind of hang out, bros hanging out for the summer. But female bats will actually congregate in groups of, 25, 50, could be into the hundreds if it's the right area. And the conditions are good enough and they could find a place to roost. And it's called a maternity colony. So all of the female bats will actually go out and kind of have their babies in a big group, strength in numbers. And they'll, spend the spring and the summer out there raising their babies. And then when it starts to get cold and the babies have become volant and they've flown off on their own, well, it's time to repeat the process all over again. And forgot to mention where they are roosting in the summer is a whole plethora of places. There could be snags, standing dead trees that have nice hollows in them for the bats to go into. Northern long-eared bats really like to roost pretty solitary under loose bark on trees. So like a shagbark hickory is perfect for a northern long-eared bat. Or they could choose what we call an anthropogenic roost, which is a man-made structure. It could be the eaves of a house, like you see up there. It could be in a barn. I have documented a 150 strong. It's this picture on the top left. Was a 150 bat strong roost in the belfry of a church because no one told them they shouldn't be stereotypical. But or the ideal man-made structure for a bat would be a bat house, which is a structure we built specifically for our bats to roost in. We hope they go there and not our attics. But you see, my guy in the bottom corner there is asking a question. What about me? Well, we should probably talk a bit about migratory bats. They are not going into caves to hibernate through the winter. I said earlier they fly south for the winter, kind of like birds do. That's not exactly correct because it turns out we know very little about the mechanisms of bat migration. This is actually kind of a mystery with a lot of active work going on to try and figure out exactly what they're doing because we find migratory bats in the winter in Maine. But we've also tracked our bats flying further south. So maybe those bats are ones from Canada and they're only coming down this far. We have found migratory bats roosting in leaf litter under snow, using like an igloo effect to make it through the winter. Because they can also go into torpor and they could go into a hibernative state, even though they don't use caves. There's a lot of very open questions here. And a lot of very interesting work has been done to try and figure out what these bats are doing when they're flying. There are some studies that put a tracker on a bat. It was in Southern California and it flew down into Mexico and then it flew up, into Texas and then it went back over in Southern California all in the span of like 2 weeks. These guys can cover great distances in a very short amount of time. And we want to learn more about like what these bats are doing. And that brings up a good question, which is how do you study bats? They are notoriously difficult to study because they fly, they're nocturnal, and they're very small. This is kind of a nightmare configuration. It's hard enough to catch, birds because they fly. Well, we also need to do that at night, and often with a much smaller animal who's a much more evasive. So the ways that we do that are one method we use is mist netting. This is you find a spot where you think bats are going to be flying through out in the woods. You put up poles with a mesh net between it, and the bats will fly into it, get stuck, and we can untangle them and You get a bat in hand, you could figure out the species visually. You could take hair samples or blood samples, which you could then use to genetically determine that bat species. And you could take a bunch of biometric data, like weighing the bat, measuring their forearm. That's one of the size metrics we use. And it's not just mist netting that you could use to get a bat in hand. You could also do harp trapping, which is this really cool setup. It's like a big frame with a basket in the bottom, and you hang fishing line vertically through it. So a bat hits the fishing line, they drop down, they fall into the basket, and there's a little plastic lip on it, so the bat can't crawl up and out of it. You could just kind of reach in, scoop up your bat, and get them in hand, and you could work them up. There's further things you can use to study bats once you have it in hand. This would be wildlife tracking. This is affixing a device to an animal to track where it goes. This is how we discovered where that hoary bat was going. There's multiple methods you could use for this. One is radio telemetry. This is a small device you see here with an antenna on it. This gets glued to the back of the bat. It emits a steady pulse at a specific signal, and you use a receiver with a little antenna that's listening into that frequency band. You point it around. Once you start hearing beeping in a direction, you'll walk that way, and you keep checking till you triangulate where that bat is. And you can see that picture on the right is my old coworker Leah walking in a very mosquito-ridden swamp looking for a bat that turned out to be in one of those trees over there. The problem with radio telemetry is there's the distance that signal is able to go out is pretty short, and you also kind of need to be actively searching. This is really good for land-based deployments, but this really doesn't help us a lot offshore. I mean, we can get a radio telemetry out in the bat, let them go, but we don't know if they're going to fly offshore. And this is, not what we want to use to be studying bats in the Gulf of Maine. Another option is there are similar tags you could put out that can be read by these receivers. It's called the MODIS network, which is Latin for movement. This is a really cool system of a bunch of monitor towers like you see over there. The idea is you put, similar to the telemetry tag, you put a tag like that on a bat or a bird. They fly, and if they fly past one of these receivers, it'll record that, and you can kind of track where that animal is pinged and get one of their and figure out their migration route. This is how this is what the view screen looks like, and this is showing the distance covered by this hoary bat. So over the course of, I think, around 10 days, it went from up there in Canada across Lake Huron and down here into the States. It covered a great distance in that time. Which is really cool. This is how we tracked that hoary bat before. The problem with this is this doesn't really help us offshore. This is a really good technology. So there's MODIS towers we put out on buoys out in the middle of the ocean to see if bats will fly past them, but it really only tells us information about one bat. And we are trying to figure out things on the population level, what species of bats are out there, what the abundance could be, what this community looks like. And unless we get a tracker on every single bat, that is not the way that we're going to be studying this. So to introduce us to how we study bats offshore, we first have to know, what do we know already about bats offshore? Well, we know that bats are offshore. This is seen in the historical record. There are accounts of bats appearing on ships, on oil platforms, out in the ocean, seen flying around as early as the 1800s. This has been a very well documented thing. And modern studies have corroborated this, where vessels going out looking for birds have seen bats flying around. And there's been more intensive things very similar to the work that BRI is currently doing that have shown that bats utilize the offshore environment. They can be pretty far out there too. And we also have seen, some of these studies have shown us that most of these bats offshore in the northeastern US, at least, are those migratory bat species. So doing this work out in the Gulf is going to add a lot more knowledge to that mystery of what are these migratory bats doing. So if we are monitoring bats over open water, how do you do that? I just described a bunch of methods and said they don't really work for us in this context. Well, I left one out, which is my bread and butter, acoustic detectors. These are specialized devices that you plug a microphone into, you put them out in the environment, and it is an ultrasonic recorder, which means it could hear things above our range of hearing. And it's if it picks up something at a specific frequency and a certain decibel level, it records for like 10 seconds and saves that audio file. You could put these out in the woods. You can put them on buildings, or for what we're doing in the Gulf, we are putting them on boats and islands and buoys. And those recordings it make looks like this. And I can look at that and tell you what species of bat made that call. You're probably wondering, well, how do I do that? So, as we all probably know, bats use echolocation. The way that they navigate at night and find their prey is they're able to vocalize at an incredibly high frequency above our range of hearing. And that bounces off their environment, goes back into their little ears. They get a picture of what's going on. They could see the insects they're looking for. They could see real the detail down to like the thickness of a single human hair. Like their echolocation is so well adapted and fine tuned to what it is that they are doing. And this is what my acoustic monitors are listening for. Um, to give you an idea of what this could sound like, so there is a part of a bat's vocalization that is in our range of hearing. This is what that sounds like. They'll give you that little chatter, that little clicking noise. But if we want to hear the full breadth of what that could sound like, well, one of the things you could do is you could slow it down, which is what I did here. It's another big brown bat. We'll see if he makes a peep. So you can see in real time, those clicks are it's you're not getting like the full picture just listening. So that's why we use these special devices, because they're able to record in those incredibly high frequencies. We could slow everything down, and it gives us pictures like this one. The reason acoustics is cool is because not only can we tell behavior from it, because when bats are hunting, they'll begin clicking very rapidly before they like pick off an insect. We call that a feeding buzz. So if we see feeding buzzes in the sonograms, like here, we know that that bat has been feeding in that area. But every species of bat calls at a different frequency with a different shape to their call in different patterns, kind of like accents. And by looking at these bat accents, we can identify a call file to species, and that lets us know what species of bats are around. Now, this is not an exact science. Sometimes you have like the Indiana bat and the little brown bat. Their calls are functionally identical. Um, you can, if you are very good at what you're doing, there are little, very specific types of calls that can be differentiated from each other. But this is a problem with the Myota species, is they all have very similar accents, and it can be very difficult to tell them apart. But yeah, that is how we are studying bats offshore, is using these devices. And we're deploying these, like I said earlier, on islands, vessels, and buoys. And here's what you probably picked up from earlier on in the talk. One of those islands was Monhegan. So what do we know about, we talked about bats offshore, we talked about bats in general, but what do we know about bats here in the Gulf of Maine? So 2014 and 2016, this organization, Stantec, did this really wide-ranging study looking in the near offshore environment. You could see it in all those little dots on there. That's where they had acoustic monitors out. Some of them were actually close to Monhegan. They had them on a bunch of buoys and islands off the coast of Maine, and they found that There were some cave hibernating bats out there, but primarily there were migratory bats in this area, up to 42 kilometers from shore, which was really cool. They found eastern red bats, hoary bats, and silver-haired bats. And they found that they were most active during that fall migration period. But what these studies didn't look at and what they really couldn't with the methods they were using, or just the limitations of what that study was looking at was all of that area in the open ocean, which brings us back to Gombat. Um, and what we were looking to do is monitor those areas in that far offshore environment to see if bats are out there. So in 2024, we put a bunch of detectors out in as many areas as we could. We had 5 on islands, we had 3 at coastal sites, and we had 4 on vessels. Some were research vessels that were out there looking at other things. We just put a bat detector on their boat where they were out looking for whales or doing salinity studies, looking at other things in the ocean. So we kind of took that opportunity to see if we could record some bats. And the really cool thing that happened with this project is we got linked up with commercial fishermen that go out into the Gulf of Maine. And it turns out they were so excited to have bat detectors put on their boats, which helped us out uh, a ton just to have that opportunity to go in areas of the Gulf where these other vessels weren't going and see if we can get bat recording. So when this started, this was helped by IFNW. Fish and Wildlife here in Maine that kind of helped us get the jump start on this project. And we did a bunch of recording in 24. And that actually resulted in some published research where we chose 2 of the vessels that we had out there that gave us the most robust data set. And we let the scientific community know what we found. And if you actually scan that little QR code there, that'll bring you to this paper and you could read it and look more in more detail to the research we were doing in 2024. So we had bat detectors on 2 vessels. One was called the Teleost. This was a Canadian Wildlife Service Environment and Climate Change Canada vessel. They put a bat detector on there, and they during the springtime traveled the north part of the Gulf of Maine. And then we had the Maria Joanne, which is a commercial fishing vessel that was coming out of Boston Harbor. This was monitored by us at BRI, and that went out during the fall migration period. And for this, I installed my nice little setup here of my Wildlife Acoustics SM4 bat detector with a microphone, and we let this sail around the Gulf. You could see in this graphic here, the yellow is where the Teleos traveled, and the blue is where the Maria Joanne traveled. And all those little dots that you see along there are where we made recordings of bats. And you could see pretty surprisingly, some of those dots are pretty far out there. During this part of the study, we recorded 16 eastern red bats, 2 hoary, 1 silver-haired, and 1 unidentified low-frequency bat on the Maria Joanne. When I say unidentified low frequency or high frequency, that is, there's not enough there for me to make a species determination, but we can determine the phonic group of the bat. So low frequency bats are silver-haired bats, big brown bats, or hoary bats. High frequency bats would be the eastern red bat or a myotis. So that's to explain what's going on there. But the Teleos recorded 24 silver-haired bat calls with 13 and 12 low frequency bat calls that were unable to be identified. The cool thing here is one of those silver-haired bat calls, or a few of them actually, from the Teleos, were recorded 169 kilometers from shore. This is one of the furthest recordings of a bat that we have in the Gulf of Maine. And one of the eastern red bats recorded by the Maria Joanne was recorded 136 kilometers from shore. So not only are we seeing that, yes, these bats are offshore in these areas, but they're very far from shore. And another really cool thing we noticed during the study is bats might be associating with the vessels, meaning the bats are following them. Potentially, there's not enough data here for me to make definitely sure they're doing this, but we were getting recordings over the span of like 5 minutes. We got 12 to 14 passes. If you've been keeping track of the numbers, this is every single bat that the teleost recorded. Um, but they were in sequence, only a few seconds apart from each other. There were never overlapping calls, so there was never two bats on the same recording. And they kind of went in a straight line along with the vessel. So these could have been bats that were flying around and just started tailing where the boat was going. Now, the other interesting thing here to note is one of the days that we got one of these tracks on the teleost, they found a bat on the vessel. So that might be a bigger indication that these bats are associating with the vessels, but you know. So into 2025, Gombat monitoring efforts continued. We had 4 vessels last year. We only had a detector on one island, which was Monhegan. We had 3 additional coastal sites, and we had a buoy for the first time. This buoy was actually near Monhegan Island. It was about, oh, wait, I have, yeah, there's the circle. There's you guys. This buoy is about 4 miles southwest of Monhegan. It's 12 miles from the nearest coastline. This was the first time we were putting a bat detector out on a buoy. So we kind of just slapped a bat detector on a buoy and put it out there to see what it could record. And it came back with some really interesting data, which I'll get to in just a second. Now, you probably recognized, this area in the photo. I think it's a little close to home. It's yes, that is Monhegan Island. And in 2024 and 2025, we had these bat detectors out on the island to see what your bat community looked like. And in 2024, we made recordings from August through October, and these are the bats that we found. We got recordings from 35 big brown bats. We had 35 call files of big brown bats. Now, to put into context what this data is showing, this is not saying that we found almost 1,000 eastern red bats on Monhegan Island. This is saying that we had 989 recordings of eastern red bats. As I explained earlier, the way that these acoustic monitors work is a certain frequency at a certain sound level passes the microphone. It records for 10 or 15 seconds and then turns off. And then once it's triggered again, it makes another recording. So we had 989 of those recordings for eastern red bats. That means there is likely a sizable population of eastern red bats living on the island. But I can't say the exact number of them. We just know proportionally, most of the bats on Monhegan seem to be eastern red bats. So yes, we had 35 big brown bats, 989 eastern red bat recordings, 5 hoary bat recordings, and 294 silver-haired bat recordings. Additionally, 929 high frequency and 324 low frequency recordings. So as I said earlier, the high frequency recordings could be eastern red bats or myotis bats, and the low frequency recordings are either silver-haired, hoary, or big brown bats, based on what we know about the bats in this region. So kind of looking at those numbers, it's safe to assume to a certain degree that those unidentified high frequency recordings are eastern red bats. But you guys, at least in the later half of the year, according to the 2024 data, you got a good community of bats living on your island, and they seem to be heavily those migratory bat species. Then in 2025, from June to December, we also had this monitor out. It, for whatever reason, recorded fewer bats overall. This could be slight differences in placement. It could be because we were primarily getting migratory bats. The bats were migrating in a different pattern. I can't say exactly why the difference in recordings was a different recording window. Different weather, different factors. But we still, for the most part, found that most of the bats on Monhegan were eastern red bats. We had 232 recordings. Again, 21 big brown bat recordings, 74 silver-haired bat, 18 hoary, a bunch of unidentified high frequency bat recordings a few more low frequency bat recordings. Now, the cool thing to see here are those little sliver bars kind of towards the middle. Uh, we got 5 recordings of a little brown bat. That is one of those cave hibernating Myotis species that we are really interested in learning more about because they are those endangered, threatened white nose affected species. So there were 5 little confirmed little brown bats, and 6 recordings that we are pretty sure are a Myotis species, but we were not able to determine the specific species. Kind of like I described earlier, a lot of them are very similar. They're hard to tell apart. So this could mean maybe there are a few little brown bats that live on Monhegan. It could be that they were tourists and maybe they got blown out there and got a little lost for a season and visited the island. This would track with those earlier Stantec studies that found that there were some cave hibernating bats that were hanging out in the islands offshore. But we don't, I can't make a real determination. Which is why the Gulf of Maine Bat Research Project is we're planning to do a bunch more of this in the coming years to get a better picture about what the bats are doing out there. And just to show you what it looked like and talk about some really cool data we pulled from 25, we have the buoy. I was not lying when I said we just slapped a bat detector on a buoy. This was 3.3 miles southwest of Monhegan. Um, I have very fancy setups now that have solar panels and these big waterproof boxes to try and get this to run for like a full year. But for this one, we were just trying it out. So we stuck it on there, running off a couple D cell batteries. And we got 2 weeks worth of data. And in those 2 weeks, we recorded 3 eastern red bats, 1 hoary, and 3 silver-haired bats, with one additional low frequency call, probably one of those migratories. And this is really cool. This is one of those buoys kind of out in the middle of the ocean. And kind of like what I talked about earlier with the bats potentially following boats around. The reason these buoys are interesting and important is there's not a whole lot attractive about a buoy. There's a light flashing every once in a while on them, but there's less to attract a bat than a vessel would. So when we have one of these buoys, and some of these are very far out there in the Gulf that I'm going to be putting bat detectors on, if a bat passes that, that means there is a bat just traveling out there in the middle of the ocean. And I really hope we get recordings of them. Maybe we could hear feeding, but we don't know what they're doing out there exactly. And that is one of the really cool research opportunities we have with putting monitors out in these spaces and trying to answer questions that we have not been able to answer before. And that kind of brings us to what does the future hold for the Gombat project? Well, we are getting ready to put more detectors out there in the Gulf. We have 5 buoys that we're looking to put detectors on. We have 5 coastal sites. We have 5 islands, and we have 8 vessels that are going to be pulling data probably starting in March of this year. This is an expansion of our project. We are funded by the Maine Department of Energy Resources, along with 13 other partner organizations. Unfortunately, Monhegan is not one of the islands for the 2026 and on project, but that buoy I talked about that is just off the coast of Monhegan is the first buoy that is going out this year. So I am very excited to go out there, visit the buoy, get this set up, and see what other bats from your community I can record and learn more about. This is a little thank you slide to all of those organizations that have helped us get these detectors offshore, learn more about them, and gave me the opportunity to let you guys know about the bats that you have on your island. And it's bats on islands are such a cool thing. It's always fascinated me. There is my favorite example of bats on islands is Hawaii has hoary bats. It doesn't have many, there's no real other, it just have hoaries. And those hoaries are genetically related to mainland hoaries from here in the United States. So how did they get to Hawaii? This has been one of the big questions because we don't really know. It is not likely that a hoary bat just flew across the Pacific and ended up there. One of the theories is that some bats got caught in a storm and blown out there, and hitched a ride on a boat or something and made their way over to the islands. But it's one of those big questions. These islands and the island bats present us with so many research opportunities, so many questions, and so many ways to answer them. So I can't wait to continue doing this in the Gulf. I can't thank the Monhegan community enough for welcoming us and allowing us to put a monitor on your gorgeous little island. I can't thank you enough for letting me rant at you about bats for about 40 minutes. And yeah, now I can open this up for questions with one last really cute video. These are mastiff bats. They're Molossus nigricans. I met them in Belize, and they're really cute. So I figured I'd share them.
Ethan, thank you so much for this really lively and fascinating and informative presentation. We've got some time for Q&A now. Do you want to take a look at the Q&A, or would you like me to read you some of the questions that are there?
Here, I can read some off and see how I can answer them.
Yeah.
So Jeanette asked, is there a citizen science program to help the study of bats? So there are a few. Um, the one I'm aware of mainly in Maine, if you find that you have bats roosting on your property, whether you see them emerging from a tree, the eaves of your house, something like that, on the IFNW, the Department of Fish and Wildlife for Maine on their website, they do have a spot where you can report that colony and keep track of them for the state, so the state can know where those bats are living. I don't know about other volunteering opportunities, say with the state for their NA-BAT stuff, which is an acoustic monitoring program. Sometimes states will allow volunteers to put monitors out. That would be something if you reached out to Maine Fish and Wildlife, particularly the BAT program, they would be able to let you know. Yes, is it presumed the bats roosting on boats, buoys, etc. when they get tired? How far can a bat fly in a single night? That was by Emma. That is a good question. Um, so we don't know exactly. I can't say scientifically the exact reasons why we have found bats on boats, but I have found plenty of bats on boats. A bunch of the projects I have worked on, I have had fishermen and other folks on boats send me pictures of bats, asking me what species it is and what it's doing there. I do find that it seems like the bats are resting on the boat. I don't know if, maybe they're roosting on the boat and just flying around occasionally and then going back to that boat. Can't really say. Maybe it was passing and it took a little break. Um, I don't think that we have seen any resting on buoys, but definitely boats. And how far can a bat fly in a single night? That hoary bat I talked about earlier that flew from like California to Mexico, it did that in like a handful of days. They can cover distances. Even our cave hibernators, I know that they can have a nightly range of like 5 miles. And again, this is an animal that's like this big, like, and it's going that far. The energetics of bats is a fascinating topic of conversation, and I can, if you're interested in how bats are able to use energy, it's slightly different, but I love to suggest this to everyone. There are scientists that have looked into vampire bats specifically because they live on this blood diet. So they want to figure out how they metabolize that and use that to be active and fly because it's a liquid diet. Like there's not a whole lot to pull from this. We're super interested in this, and the way they study this is it turns out vampire bats are good runners. So you make a chamber that can sense respiration. You could look at the chemicals and things coming out in the respiration, get an idea of energetics, and there's a treadmill in it. And you just run the treadmill and the bat jogs. And we use that to figure out how the bat is expending energy. So if you're ever curious, there are videos online of bats running on treadmills, and it's very entertaining. I love it. But there are other questions I can get to. Um, are there similar offshore bat research studies happening in other states or maritime Canada? Yes. So that one of those vessels from 2024 was a Canadian research vessel. There is a lot of work going on in Canada. Canada has a very large bat biologist community, it turns out. I have gotten the honor of working with a few of them in my time. One of the person who has lent me the setups I'm going to be putting on buoys out here was doing work out in the Pacific. And in general, bats in the offshore environment is a very big topic of discussion, especially when it comes to the impacts of things like offshore wind, of increased shipping traffic. And as we are seeking to utilize more of that offshore environment, this is one of those big questions, how these things affect our wildlife. And, we think to look for fish, marine mammals, birds, but bats are a big component of that as well. Um, Neil said, do offshore windmills endanger bats? That is an open question. It is something we are actively studying, and something that a project like this can help us find answers towards. Is learning more about are bats out there? What are they doing out there? We can figure out more clearly the answers to those questions. Will you capture any bats in the Monhegan study? I do know, that was Cindy. I do not believe we have any plans to do that. Um, but if you guys really want us to, maybe we could see. I could go visit the island. We could go look for some bats. At the very least, if you guys were interested in it, we know there's bats there. I could take you on a bat walk sometime. Like we can figure out future programs. I can bring my bat detector and we can go meet some bats flying around. Um, what would attract a bat to a vessel? That would be the sound they're emitting, the lights on the boat. You gotta stay lit up at night, or the fact that like there's, the boat's traveling out in the middle of nowhere and it's kind of the only landmark. And if a bat's flying out there, it's gonna be attracted to this large, loud, interesting thing that kind of showed up. And that's, kind of what we think the bats are doing to be attracted to the vessels. Or, maybe the bat took a nap while the boat was in port, and then it woke up and it wasn't on land anymore. That could potentially be, and that's why this is again like a really cool area to study because there's so many unanswered questions. Uh, let's see, what other do I have here? How do migratory bats sleep when they are offshore? Really good question. Again, migratory bats can cover a lot of ground in a single night. Usually, they have a spot that they can stop and take a nap. Um, we do see that migratory bats, when they're on their long form migrations, they will stop over for a day or two, um, grab a snack, and they actually use torpor to sleep while they are flying to their wintering areas. So that's how they are able to preserve those energetics. Now, offshore, um, that's a good question. Maybe this is why they're turning up on boats. They must have some strategy in order to make it across the Gulf. And this is again why it's such a cool research question. Like, how do they do this? Because the thing to know with bats is bats don't soar like birds do. So we have like the albatross lives offshore and it just glides offshore until it lands one time of the year to lay eggs and have babies, and the rest of the time it's just out soaring over the water. Bats don't soar; they have to flap constantly, so they are always expending energy like to its max when they are flying. So any bat that's flying over open water, like they only have so much energy. They're gonna run out at some point, and they have found some way to make it work. which is super cool. Also, Laura, I'm just going to keep answering questions. When we get to a point we need to stop, just give me the signal.
Okay. Why don't
Okay.
why don't you take one more question and then we can wrap it up and find a way for follow-up after.
Yes, let me. Okay, so I could have two quick questions here that I can answer very quickly. One, someone said, "Is there a Merlin type app available to detect bats?" There is. It is a little more specialized though. That group that makes the bat detectors I use, Wildlife Acoustics, makes a device called the Echometer Touch. This is plugs into a phone or a tablet. There is an app for it, and it's just a mini ultrasound microphone that you can use to listen into bat calls, record them. It'll give you an identification. It is the exact device I would bring should I do a bat talk or a bat walk over in Monhegan. This is it's like a $200 device. It's not cheap. But it's the closest we have to Merlin for bats. And then I saw a bunch of questions about bat boxes. This is actually, I spent most of my time. So when I was working in New Jersey, I installed so many boxes across the state. Um, Putting up a bat box, kind of like putting up a birdhouse or any kind of man-made structure for an animal to roost in. There's no guarantee that an animal will find that. I like to encourage bat box installations as long as they are done safely and effectively. It just creates more habitat for bats. There's more areas for them to roost, and especially with how their populations have been hit by white nose and other, white nose, climate change, human development. They're getting it from all directions. So just making habitat for them is good. If you were looking to install a bat house on your property, I would look for what we call a maternity box. This is a medium-sized bat house. It usually has three chambers inside of it. It would be a maternity box, a three-chambered bat house, or a like a nursery box. I think those are the what you would look up online. A lot of places have blueprints available. You could build your own. There is this company called Bat Conservation and Management that sells kits that you can build or fully built bat boxes, and how you would install them. Plenty of guides online. My quick down and dirty installation guide is the side of an existing structure is always best. They're way more thermoregulated. Um, they tend to be safer from predators, and I have, in my experience, found bats roosting in them more often. So if you could put a bat box on the side of your house, a shed, a barn, something like that, I think that's the best place. You can put it on a freestanding pole. That also works. I would recommend against putting it on a tree because that'll shade it out. Predators can get there. I just haven't found a lot of success in trees. When you install it, should be 15, 20 feet off the ground. Bats need area to drop down, swoop out, keep them up and away from predators. It should be southeastern facing in an area it's going to get a lot of sun in the beginning of the day. Um, and if you want to really make a lot of habitat, I would install one bat box in an area that gets a lot of sun and then one that's a little more shaded because sometimes the bats will move between the two roots to find the perfect like thermo-regulating temperature range.
Cool. Well, thank you to everybody who asked such great questions. That was wonderful. And thank you, Ethan, for sharing your expertise with us in this outstanding presentation. I love the idea of taking a bat walk with you on Monhegan. That sounds fantastic.
I'm
Um,
definitely not fishing to visit a lovely Maine island.
I know that we can't hear all of you applauding, but please join me in a virtual round of applause for Ethan Gilardi. We really appreciate it, Ethan. And to all of you, we look forward to seeing you at another of our upcoming programs. As I mentioned at the outset, we've got Monhegan Trivia coming up on Thursday, February 26th and then Bonnie Newsome talking about swordfish in Wabanaki waters on Wednesday, March 25th. So we hope to see you then. You can register for those events on the Monhegan Museum or the Monhegan Associates websites. And while you're there, you can also become a member if you're not already. So until then, be well and thank you for being part of our community. Have a great night.